Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Fields. A while back, I put out a video on awareness. Many of my patients that were struggling with addictions or other kinds of dependencies, food dependency issues, they told me that that was one of the most important lessons they learned in terms of increasing their awareness. And in my video yesterday, part four of that four-part series, I talked a lot about coming to grips or coming to terms with the fact that your main struggle is with a food dependency issue. And that really has so much to do with awareness, becoming aware of what's really going on with us is super, super important. Don't beat yourself up anymore about having a difficult time losing weight. Don't beat yourself up about being overweight. Don't beat yourself up about not being able to keep the weight off once it has been lost. Don't beat yourself up about that. What you want to kind of beat yourself up about is being in denial about what the real problem is and really kind of accepting that. That is the most important thing. And that really comes about with awareness. You cannot gain any kind of control over your behavior if you are not aware. You have to be aware what's going on with you. And so many of us, I'm not just talking about people with food dependency issues, so many of us live life a majority of the time in a way where we're not as aware as we could be. We function many times as an automaton, just responding to stimuli, responding to impulses, urges, cravings, automatic thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of us could benefit from being more aware of what's going on internally. Now, we can't be aware and put so much thought into every little decision that we do because, quite honestly, it would be inefficient if there weren't certain processes that were automatized. The one I think of so quickly is driving, right? Having to put so much thought into every little move that you make while you're driving, that level of effort and thoughtfulness may, may be inefficient. It may be an inefficient use of our time. That there should be some processes like washing dishes, things like that. There should be some processes, some tasks in our lives that are more automatized. However, there's a good part of our life where we are living just too automatically, too impulse driven, and there's not enough thought going into what we're doing. And this could not be more true of people that are struggling with compulsive behaviors, addictions, dependencies, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to come to terms with what the real struggle is. You need to become aware of that. The next step, and that's what this video is really going to talk about, is what I call deliberate action. When you are aware, you can then make deliberate, conscious decisions, thoughtful decisions. And this video is really about a bit about me in terms of how I try to live my life in an attempt to teach you and to also inspire you. Deliberate action, thoughtful action is action that is not done impulsively, is action that is not done with little thought. And even if the action is unhealthy or not as healthy as it could be, I will always make the argument that that is much better than doing a comparable action that you did without thought, because at least in the former situation, you had more conscious awareness of what you were doing, and you made more of a conscious choice to engage in that behavior. And that is much better than doing things automatically, because in the former, that is a step towards control. If you're not aware, you cannot have control of your behavior. If you're not thinking through what you really want to do in a certain situation and planning a little bit, then again, you're not in very good control of your behavior. Here's an example. Two people. One person, in the heat of the moment, their spouse gets them really upset, and they lash out and yell and this and that, and say, that's it, I'm not going on vacation with you next week. I'm really mad at you. And they do it impulsively without little thought. And then after that, they feel really guilty about their decision. And they're saying to themselves, like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, this and that. In the second situation, the same thing happens. Their spouse really upsets them. And in this situation, they don't impulsively say, I'm really mad at you, this and that, I'm not going on vacation with you. They don't do that. They sit and they think about what they want to do in this situation. And they think about the pros and the cons of different kinds of statements they might make, or different kinds of consequences they might give their spouse. And they sit and they say, you know, this behavior that my spouse has been doing has been going on for a long time. It really aggravates me. I feel like I really need to make a stand. I feel like I need to do something drastic. I know if I say I don't want to go on vacation with you, if I don't stick to my guns, my spouse won't believe me in the future. So I feel like I should really stick to my guns and say, like, if I'm going to do this consequence, say, like, that's it, I'm not going with you next week. But that's going to suck for me, because I really was looking forward to this vacation. It doesn't feel like the best decision. It doesn't feel like the healthiest way to do this, but I just feel like I want to make a stand for myself. I feel like it's time to push back. You know what? I'm going to do it. And then they say to the spouse, you know what? You really upset me. I've been talking to you many times about this behavior, and now I don't want to go on vacation with you next week. Their decision essentially stayed the same in both scenarios. And an argument could be made that the decision that came about in the second scenario was also an unhealthy one, because now they're punishing themselves by also not being able to go on vacation. And maybe that's quite a drastic consequence to give the spouse, or maybe there's a much healthier way of dealing with it, like a real sit down with the spouse, a real hashing out of differences and disagreements and things of that nature. So an argument could still be made for the second situation that it was unhealthy. However, the person in the second situation demonstrated far greater control, because they thought through the situation. They thought through the consequences. They thought through their feelings, and knowing on some level that this probably wasn't a great decision, they still went through with it. That is still much better, because at least that person took some time to reflect on what they're doing, and they didn't respond like a robot or an automaton. It wasn't this, reflexive kind of behavior. It was thoughtful. Even though the result stayed the same, they exerted better control. I'll give you another example. Someone has a drinking issue. Situation A, they're really anxious about why this person they're dating has not called them in the last 6 or 7 hours or returned their call in the last 6 or 7 hours or texted them. And so they say, I'm really uncomfortable. I got to drink. And they start drinking. And they get very drunk. Same situation. But this time, this person says to themselves, I'm feeling really anxious. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. I don't know why this person that I like so much has not returned my call or texted me in the last 7 hours. I don't know what's going on with them, but it's really making me freak out a little bit. I know the healthier way to respond to this is probably, doing some cognitive therapy techniques such as, maybe they're not available. Maybe something came up. Maybe their phone died. Maybe there's something really important that they needed to attend to. Maybe they didn't see that I called. Sometimes cell phones can be fluky. Or maybe they're not that into me, and that's okay. I can handle that. I'm not going to like it, but I can handle it, right? So the person in this situation knows that that would be the better way of handling this by trying to cope with it. But instead, they say, I know that's a better way of handling the situation, but I just don't feel like doing that right now. And I know I'm going to feel badly tomorrow about drinking, but maybe in the future, I'll change my behavior. Right now, I just feel like I want to drink. I just feel like that's the best decision for me. My anxiety is really bad, and I just don't feel like dealing with it right now. And then they go and get really, really drunk. Again, in both situations, the person wound up choosing the same action. And we can all agree that that action was clearly unhealthy. But the person in the second situation is in a much better position because they did not react so impulsively. They did not react like an automaton. They actually thought through it and they came to the decision to do this unhealthy thing. That is a person that has better control than the first person. And I know that this may be a bit of a controversial viewpoint. Other people may say, but they both did unhealthy behaviors. Who cares? Doesn't matter, but it does matter. I'll tell you why it matters. You might look at it in just this context as this one situation. And if you just look at it as this one situation, you could make a case that doesn't matter. They both made unhealthy decisions. Who cares if one thought more about it than the other? But if you look at it from a more general perspective, if you look at this out of this specific context and look towards the future of both of these individuals' lives, which person stands a far better shot at eventually gaining even more control over their behavior and making healthier decisions in the future? Person B, because they at least stopped to think through it. And they even considered possibly using cognitive techniques to cope with the situation, but they just didn't feel like doing it then. But at least they stopped and they thought it through and they understood that what they were doing was not so good. And they thought of alternative options. They were thinking through the situation. That person is much further along the path towards healthy decision-making, because the fact of the matter is they're able to stop themselves and think through the situation. And next time, or maybe the third time, or the fifth time, or the seventh time, they might actually be able to control themselves to such a degree that they don't make this unhealthy choice. If you continue to give in to these food urges and cravings, but you at least stop and think through each decision and take deliberate action. That is, I know this is not a good thing to do. I know I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. I understand all that. I also understand the alternatives and the things that I should do instead, but I'm going to make this choice anyways. I know some of the consequences that are going to happen, such as me feeling guilty about myself. And I understand that, and I accept that. I'm still going to make this choice. Even though your behavior hasn't changed at all, you are in such a better position than you were before, even though your behavior hasn't changed. I did a video a while back on the stages of change as it relates to different levels of motivation. And stage 3 is, if you remember, the mental preparation stage, and stage 4 is the action stage. Okay. Stage 2, the one prior, is the contemplative stage. So the contemplative stage is like you're thinking about change. And then stage 3 is like you made up your mind, you have to change. And then stage 4 is you're actually doing it. Stage 4 is like you're doing the behaviors, right? So if you think of it from that lens, and then the stage before contemplative is pre-contemplative, you're not even thinking of anything. So if you think of it from that lens, right? If you're completely unaware, it's like you're in the pre-contemplative stage. You're not contemplating making any changes. You're not even aware of the changes you need to make. In the contemplative stage, you're aware that making changes could be a good thing, right? And then finally, you get to the mental preparation stage where you're psyched up. You're like, I really should do this. I really need to do this. You're very, very aware that this is what you want to do and the reasons for why you want to do it. And then you take action. So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like you're aware of your behavior. And then in the moments, you are not only aware of what's going on with you internally and your struggles, but you're thinking through possible cost-benefit analysis, consequences, and then coming to a decision to take a certain action. And even if the action is unhealthy, because it was deliberate, means you are in a stage of change that's far more advanced than somebody who impulsively does an action, or even worse, isn't even aware of what's going on at all, right? So it's kind of like this. Here's a person that's completely unaware. There's an urge, I'm going to go eat. Here's a person who's aware. There's an urge, I'm feeling kind of anxious. I don't like this. I'm going to go eat. Here's a person who's aware and is now going to be conscious about what decision they're going to make, and they're going to make this deliberately. Here's a craving. I feel anxious. I'm anxious because of this, and that. I know I shouldn't eat. It's not a good reason to eat. I know what I should be doing instead, trying to deal with the situation mentally. I'm uncomfortable. I just don't feel like doing that right now. I'm just not in a good mood. I know it's not a good reason. I know I'm going to feel guilty tomorrow. I'm going to go eat. Do you see the difference? All these people, right, are like in different kinds of mental preparation stages, right? The last person in that sequence is the closest to actually making a change. So what I'm really emphasizing in this video is, don't just measure progress by whether or not you're doing a weight loss plan and following it, you can measure progress in even smaller degrees, in the sense that there can be progress made right before you're about to do that. And I have to tell you, I feel like so often we get so close to really pulling the trigger and making that change, and we just say no, because you know what? There's no evidence that I'm really ready to do this, right? I don't feel really ready to do this because I don't feel like I've made any substantial changes. But if you look at it in this way, you might find that unbeknownst to you, or you were simply unaware, that you have been making slow but significant changes mentally, that your awareness has increased and you're starting to think through the situation more. And even though it's resulting in the same unhealthy behavior, mentally you're evolving and you're like right there. This is super, super important to take a look at and to gauge, so that in the future, if you don't feel ready to change a behavior, can you at least change how you respond in that moment from impulsively to more thoughtful? The behavior can be exactly the same, but can you at least make a shift from responding impulsively without thought to responding with some level of awareness, and then responding with deliberate action where you know exactly what you're doing and why this is not a good reason, but you're still going to do it anyway. And of course, there could be times where it is a good reason, where you're like, I have an urge to eat. I think through the situation. I haven't eaten in 5 hours. I only had a small muffin, or a small cup of bran flakes, and I'm starving. Okay, you thought through it. So even when we're making positive decisions about eating, I want you to be aware and deliberate. There's got to be that connection before it translates to behavior. And I said, that I wanted to talk a little bit about how I live my life deliberately. And this is how I live my life deliberately. Sometimes I get an impulse to blow off an exercise plan for the day, a workout. And I say to myself, what's going on with me? Is it really impossible to do this workout? Am I being honest with myself? Or am I just trying to make excuses? Is this really something I can't do? And I try to keep these things as a priority. And sometimes I don't always make the best decision, but most of the time, the large majority of the time, I'm aware that I'm not making a good decision. And sometimes I say, you know what? I just don't feel like being good today. I just don't feel like being good. I know this is not a good decision or a good reason. I don't feel like being good. I'm happy to say that the large majority of times I make healthy decisions about food. I make healthy decisions about my workouts, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes I don't, but I'm aware. And the large majority of the times I'm doing it deliberately, in the sense that I'm in control. I know what I'm doing. Same thing about food. There are times where I pass by the refrigerator, and on top of the refrigerator are all these, unhealthy treats. And I know that I already had a couple of nights going out with my wife or with friends, indulging on some really nice dinners that aren't the healthiest, but that's okay from time to time. And so I'm looking at those treats and I'm saying, I'm having a craving to just eat them. But I know that's not a good idea, because I just had 2 nights where I had my fill, so to speak. I indulged. It was nice. I'm good now. I should be good. And I think through it, and I think like, this is not a good decision. And well, all right, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm going to give in. I know I'm probably not going to feel good about myself the next day, but it doesn't happen often. And the large majority of the time, I think through the situation And the large majority of the time, the result is I'm not eating those sweets on top of the refrigerator, or I'm not blowing off my workout plan. I'm not perfect by any means, but I have gained a lot of control over my food dependency issue. Do I still have some vulnerability to it? Absolutely. But my vulnerability has decreased a lot. And that happens when you gain control over it and you keep consistently doing the right thing and making the healthy, right choices for yourself. And I'm talking healthy in a mental health standpoint. And I don't feel so guilty when once in a blue moon, I don't make a good choice because I'm human. It's okay. I would feel really guilty if I very often made the wrong choice, or even worse, consistently made the wrong choice, right? I live my life the large majority of the time very deliberately, very aware, and making many good choices for myself when it comes to food. This is a level that all of you can get to. It takes work. It took me a lot of work, but I'm happy to say it doesn't have to take you as much work, because I already made a ton of errors and learned from them and made many mistakes. And I can help you not make the same mistakes I did. I can expedite the process for you. And I hope that these videos are doing that. I am hoping that these videos have already increased your awareness, and many of you may actually already be starting to think through these decisions rather than responding impulsively. The goal is not perfection. The goal is to be aware much more often, making deliberate decisions much more often, the large majority of the time, and making healthy choices the large majority of the time. This is Dr. Fields, and I hope this was helpful. Post your comments or questions to this video. I'd love to respond to them.